Hi guys, good morning. I hope you're doing fine. So basically, I am based at Dublin City University. I'm a postdoc fellow, and my PhD was about ISIS. I had a look at ISIS from the state perspective. Most of the people argue about the Islamic side, whether they are Islamic or not, but I was interested in the state side of ISIS. And what I did, I tried to look at the performances of modern states, how ISIS performing at the state in the official windows, right? Now, this is branched out from that project. And basically, this is focusing more on their foreign policy. Now, many people do not recognize that they had a proper foreign policy because they never had any embassies and they didn't have a properly appointed foreign minister and so on and so forth, because that's our understanding of foreign policy these days. Now, as a group, they had a proper foreign policy. If you go through the videos like I did, uh, for the project, PhD project, I had 374 videos. And if you play them back to back, that's like 64 hours of content, right? So you can imagine what I went through. Now, so in terms of foreign policy, what I will do is I will focus on two different um, aspects of their foreign policy, right? Before I do that, I will give you an introduction. So they heavily identified two aspects of their name. So it was Islamic for sure, and then state as well. We got bogged down on the Islamic aspect, but state, not many people have discussed that. Now, because it's in their name, Ad-Dawlat al-Islamiyya, right? So it's very obvious. And they were quite interested in the state side of things, right? For this article, I coded 69 official videos, right? And they were published from July 2014, when the caliphate was established, all the way to July 2017, and it explores their foreign relations. All right. Now, in terms of questions, feel free to jump in. Anytime you have any question, don't wait for me to end the presentation. Challenge me anywhere you like. And yeah, let's make it interactive. Now, in this article, I argue that ISIS wanted to be known as a state, like I said, but not just any state, a modern state, just how we understand what a modern state is, right? Now, there were some major exceptions. They wanted to be known as an Islamic state with Sharia as the rule of law, all right? Now, when we talk about state, we kind of associate that with statehood. That's our understanding of statehood. But in my project, I argue that they were not interested in statehood because they knew that no one is going to recognize them, whether it's an Islamic state, whether it's Saudi Arabia, or whether it's any Western, no country on this planet is going to recognize them as a state, right? So the statehood route was not viable for us. On the other hand, stateness was something they were interested in. Now, what's stateness? In a nutshell, stateness is the state performing its duty, right, towards its citizens, protection of the borders, having an effective government, and communicating with other states around the world. That's foreign policy in a nutshell, right? So, what they did, they broadcasted state-like performance, okay, which also included foreign policy. So every state has a foreign policy, whether it's the Maldives or Palau in the Pacific Ocean, or whether it's USA, China, any other state, and they went for that as well. Okay, but their communication was through their videos. That was the major medium, right? Through their videos, they were issuing their foreign policy. So there were videos like a message to America, a message to France, a message of no, France is burning, right? These kind of videos, these were the titles. And these were very direct messages. Okay. Now, what was the idea behind those messages or those videos? It was to convince people that they are a legitimate government. And the legitimacy is granted by God, like by by the fact that they are trying to implement Islam. That gives them the legitimacy, right? And to garner support. Whoever was the viewer of these videos, They expected that they would watch it and somehow they will change their mind and they will go join IS in their own territory. That was the idea. And it worked. Okay, now I don't think we need to go through the background because most of you know here how did it start, how it was going, and how it ended, right? One thing I do like to mention here is that they are decimated, but they are still relevant. They haven't disappeared, right? It's now in its guerrilla mode. So there are pockets in Afghanistan. We hear about ISKP or Khorasan province. It's still in Egypt, not far from Gaza, right? It's in Iraq, in Libya, right? In Nigeria with Boko Haram. Now they are in direct conflict with, right? In Syria, of course, in Yemen, and many other places like Mozambique. That's a new territory that they are making inroads, right? Okay, now, uh, okay. In terms of conceptual framework, so for my thesis as well as for this paper, I used the Montevideo Convention of 1953, right? And that was the convention which set in stone the criteria for any state. So any territorial entity that claims to be a state has to fulfill four criteria: has to have population, has to have territory, a government, and a foreign policy, right? Um, and to put this into context, ISIS performances of modern stateness, they focused on state making as well as the war making. And according to Tilly, that's how states are created. Right? State makes the war makes the state. Okay. Uh right. Now, in terms of the videos, I had 12 and a half hours of content that I coded myself. And two of the videos were before the declaration of the state, but they did have some foreign policy content in those videos. So I included that. I made some exceptions, right? And three of them were after the dismantlement. So when they lost Raqqa and Mosul, which happened simultaneously, they released some videos after that. I included that as well because it had some value, right? Most of the videos are in Arabic and English languages, but there are other videos like Bengali, Farsi, French, German, Kurdish, Russian, and Turkish because the foreign policy was directed at these things. Okay. Now, how I use MaxQDA software. This is my favorite software ever. Made my life easy. And it's really great with videos. So here are the videos. These are the codes. If you can see clearly, there are civilian voices and there is civilian suffering that they use, right? And then they talk about the enemies of ISIS. There are glimpses of life under the caliphate. So they're showing that life as it exists in the West is quite rotten and it's in a downward spiral. Whereas the life in the caliphate is amazing. Everything is just great, despite the bombardment and all the other problems. We still are standing strong, right? And then there were the narratives coming from the leaders, from the commanders. All of these people were issuing statements directly in the videos. And you could see them uh, with the backdrop of Dabqa Dam in Syria. So they were sat in some interesting places and talking about foreign policy. I don't think any foreign minister has ever tried to approach this way, foreign policy this way, right? So that's the software I use. Now, in terms of the themes, so foreign fighters, they are issuing vox pops and direct messages. They also use the enemies of ISIS, what they are saying about ISIS or about in crisis, so on and so forth. They use that. So they are weaponizing the words of the enemy, their own benefit, right? And of course, there is civilian voices. Now, there's not one single civilian that was included in these videos who said anything that just crossed the party line. No one said anything. It was always in ISIS's favor. And of course, there's no need to imagine why that didn't happen, right? But of course, there was something interesting that I found out. There were seditions or juxtapositions in these videos. So they were saying, this is the problem that the world is facing, and we have the solution. This is our solution. This is how it should be, right? So they always juxtapose, and we don't usually see that in the messaging of other groups, for example. And then, of course, they had historical narrative of how Islam started and how we deviated and how we brought it back. The caliphate has been restored, so on and so forth. So these are the themes. Now, let's get into the meats and bones of the research. Something which is obvious from get-go is the fact that they had discontent or they had this hate, this dislike for international norms. They didn't believe in it. Even though they were performing stateless according to international norms, they knew that you have to show population and territory and government and foreign policy, right? You have to have an effective government and so on and so forth. But they hated these rules. So that was the first thing. And then the propaganda releases showed disdain, of course, for convention and other states' right to sovereignty. They did not believe it. They did not believe in borders, for example, right? For them, borders was just a reference on the maps, and they were going to expand them, right? Interestingly, when it came to borders, they always said, "Oh, we are going to go to Lebanon, or we are going to cross over into Iraq and Saudi Arabia, and so on and so forth." They never headed north towards Turkey. Surprising, never mentioned that. Maybe that was the plan later, but there was never any talk of it. Okay. Now they wanted to engage with the international community. It's not true when people say that they had nothing to do with the international community. They wanted to, but it was on their own terms and conditions. They wanted themselves to be recognized as the only state in the world, right? That we are the only state, and you are illegitimate entities. Once you accept that, you accept our authority, which is highest, then we can have some kind of conversation. Okay. Rejection of all authority. So at the inception of the caliphate, which was the 28th of June, that's when the official announcement came. And then a week later, Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, he appeared in the mosque for the Friday sermon. So Abu Muhammad al-Abdani, he issued this statement, and this was basically the cornerstone of their foreign policy. So it said, we clarify to the Muslims that with this declaration of Khilafah, it is incumbent upon all Muslims to pledge allegiance to Khalifa Ibrahim and support him, right? The legality of all emirates, groups, states, and organizations become known by the expansion of the Khalifa's authority and arrival of its troops to their aid. So this was the official announcement of establishment of the caliphate. Now, rejection of all authority was the cornerstone, like I said, and they contrasted themselves with the Taliban's Islamic Emirate of Afghanistan. Now, at that time, the Taliban were not in charge of Kabul. They were occupying different parts of Afghanistan, right? They were on their own. It was a guerrilla government. But at the same time, they said they are not a true Islamic government. We are, by all means. They are not. So they tried to delegitimize them as well. Now, they also engaged in something called Raya state or rogue state diplomacy, right? Now, what that means is it's the methods by which members of the international community or those standing outside engage in extralegal or disorderly conduct. For example, these days, there is this huge debate going around Israel's conduct in Gaza. So some people are saying that because they are being dragged to the International Court of Justice, this is their engagement in Pariah diplomacy. This is an example. Okay. And then, of course, there are other states that are engaged in Pariah diplomacy, for example, Belarus, Cuba, Eritrea, Iran, Israel, Myanmar, which is Burma, North Korea, Syria, Venezuela, and a few other states as well, right? Now, Russia is also considered a pariah state thanks to its war and its involvement in Ukraine and the sanctions imposed as a result. Now, in terms of the foreign policy doctrine, what they had was the basis was extinction of gray zone. That was the doctrine. They were trying to remove the gray zones. They were saying it's only black and white. Everything else, which does not represent us, is black. It's dark and it's evil, and we are the only legitimate authority. And people have to pick and choose. Either they stand with us or against us. So this is coming from what Bush spoke, and Bin Laden quoted him when he said, "You're either with us or against us." All right. Now, there are too many details, but let's have a look at the foreign policy towards the neighbors. Okay. The first one, Saudi Arabia, though ideologically they are very close or used to be close, because now Saudi Arabia is another country, isn't it? But the ideology is Wahhabism, right? Salafism. So despite the same ideology, they refuse to accept Saudi Arabia as an Islamic country. Okay? When it came to Turkey, despite them working together behind the scenes, when they started losing territory and Turkey decided to cut off its ties with ISIS, they burned two Turkish soldiers alive. And we more or less remember about the Jordanian Air Force pilot. But so Turkish soldiers were burned alive as well. And this was a demonstration of foreign policy. With Israel, of course, there is always this debate. Oh, why doesn't ISIS attack Israel? I don't know. No one knows why. Right? They didn't mention that either. But of course, they have talked about Israel. There is lots of rhetoric about Israel. Okay. Iran, of course, Iran has been attacked uh, plenty of times. I think 6 or 7 times, and they were very against Iran, of course, on ideological grounds because they're Sunnis and Iranians are Shia. Okay. Now, the other thing I would like to mention is their engagement with non-state actors. This is something no one has talked about. Yeah. So once they became a caliphate, they attracted a lot of suitors and lots of jihadi organizations in different countries. And what they did, once they tried to join ISIS, they said, okay, that's great. That we can have a good relationship. How about you become our external province? Okay, fine. What do we get in return? So they got lots of training, lots of resources, and of course, recognition. And after the recognition, these groups, at least three of them, they just went ballistic. Their capabilities improved, right? So the first group that I mentioned here is Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, okay, which means supporters of Jerusalem, right? So it started as an insurgency in Sinai Peninsula in Egypt, right? Not, it was right after the military coup in Egypt, okay? So yeah, they gave them the bayat, and that was in November 24th. Okay, so once ISIS was established enough, they sent um, some of the founding members of Ansar Bayt al-Maqdis, Syria, and that's when they struck a chord. But later, the announcement came from Sinai Peninsula itself. So there were fighters; they all were assembled in the desert somewhere, and they stood in front of the camera, and that's how they announced their Pledge of Allegiance. All right, okay. So that's one way of conducting foreign policy for IS, where you give them the acknowledgement, and in return, ISIS acknowledges that, and they declare it as the external province. Okay, so that's the first organization. The second one that I look at is Ansar Sharia, and this is based in Libya, right? So we all know that Gaddafi ruled Libya for 42 years, and after he was toppled, um, it was chaos and still is chaos. The country is divided now in at least two or three different administrations. All right. One of the groups, known as Katibat al-Battar al-Libi, which is the Libyan Battar Brigade. Battar is the name of the sword of the Prophet. Okay? So they went to Libya, they went to Syria, and once they returned, they formed their own group, and then they went on to capture a few cities. like Sirte and Benghazi and parts of Turkey. Okay. So, yeah, they also offered their Pledge of Allegiance to ISIS. And once ISIS got the Pledge of Allegiance, they were declared as the external province, and lots of content came from places like Sirte, which is the birthplace of Gaddafi. So who could have imagined that once Gaddafi is gone, the whole place would turn into a Salafist stronghold? Okay. And the third group that I look at is Boko Haram, which was founded in 2002. It was a low-level insurgency, but once they killed Muhammad Yusuf in 2009, it just got out of control, right? So the translation, rough translation is Western education is forbidden. That's Boko Haram, right? And what they do is they are also Salafists in ideology. And Abu Bakr Shekau, he pledged allegiance to ISIS, and that happened in March 2015. So they were the latest to join ISIS. But 2 minutes, yeah, perfect, thank you. But they were the most effective organization, and later it turned into a civil war between these groups, internecine fighting. Okay. ISIS tried to replace Abu Bakr Shekau because they charged him with being an extremist, which is unbelievable. Like ISIS, it's like the pot telling kettle black, right? Calling kettle black. So they fell out. It was massive, the whole falling out, and Abu Bakr Shekau, apparently, he was accused of deviance and misguidance, but it was actually the use of female suicide bombers. He was using kids, small children from who were kidnapped from schools. He was using that, and ISIS didn't like this, apparently, right? But he also embezzled funds, and he was calling takfir on everyone who was opposing him. Okay, that was the problem. That's where they fell out. There was a fierce battle that took place in the north east of Nigeria in Sambesi forest, and Abu Bakr Shekau reportedly killed himself. He exploded a suicide vest. Uh, sweet karma. Now, in terms of conclusions, the groups, the ones I mentioned, they still exist, like Boko Haram still exists in Nigeria. Ansar al-Sharia, pockets here and there. It's very hard to discern whether they are active or not. But Ansar Bait al-Maqdis or Wilayat Sinai, still there, but they have been decimated by the Egyptian army. Sometimes they do stage these fake checkpoints and things like that, but it's more or less under control. Now, in terms of conclusions, ISIS, uh, Islamic State's foreign policy team's videos confirm its foundational belief that the caliphate is a super state. So they were operating along the lines of Nazi Germany or USSR or one of these super states that did not believe in borders as such. Okay, borders were temporal, all right? And as a result, ISIS remained undeterred and refused to enter into relations with other states, right? They made it very clear that we have nothing to do with the international system. Despite having the capacity, they had the capacity, they had the territory, right? They could have sent some members from the government to other countries to have some kind of negotiations, right? Diplomats, for example. All foreign policy statements issued by ISIS came from the clerics, from the fighters, and from the leaders, and it was based on extension of gray zone doctrine. All right. What else? Now, yeah, they made some exceptions as well in terms of arguing that, oh, we just follow the Quran and Hadith. Sometimes they make clear violations of that. For example, the burning of people. It's forbidden in Islam completely, right? But they still went on and they burned these people, and they used some imam back in 14th or 15th century saying, oh, well, he said that, he authorized it, so that's okay. Anyway, so yeah, that's more or less the conclusion. The ties helped it expand the caliphate. Now, you might ask me the question that why did I not include Khorasan province, for instance, right? Khorasan province, I did not include that because before it did not exist as an autonomous group, whereas these three groups that I included in the study, they were terrorist organizations in the first place, right? So that's my explanation, and that's the end of my presentation. Thanks very much.